And the Reverend Naomi King, and I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about the doors of hate and how easily those doors shutter our hearts. They can come about simply from feeling exhausted, from not wanting to have to learn one more thing or discover that one more way that I used to be is wrong or inappropriate. It's a real defensiveness around it, this sort of fragility. It's actually a hallmark of white supremacist culture. And that supremacist part of white culture is this idea that it's so good, we don't even have to acknowledge it's the culture. There's a lot of cultures. And, I don't find that one culture is better than the other. There's a lot of differences. There are things that I admire in very many cultures. And there's some things I really abhor, including in white culture. And one of the things I really abhor in white culture is this idea that it's okay for the world to take care of my feelings. In fact, that's the way it's supposed to be. Reality is, the world does not have to take care of my feelings if there isn't violence behind not doing that. And the violence might be dismissal or tone policing, chastising someone, teasing them, that they're too sensitive. And then it might also be crying. A lot of people who've been killed over white women's tears. And so there's a real responsibility for our own feelings. It needs to happen, rather than lashing out at others. Feel the violence in that response. That unwillingness and even inability to be discomforted. Part of white supremacist culture is the idea if you're light enough and passing enough, everybody else's job is to make sure you're not really uncomfortable. And that's part of how hate happens. Hate begins to take root in not being able to tolerate difference, in taking these shorthand cuts that our brains automatically tend to make. We're pattern-making creatures, so we're going to go find those patterns and then seeing them as threats. And once we've got those threats and the neat little box that we've shoved somebody into, it's okay to dehumanize them completely, and they're not people anymore. But we are. And those not people are still expected to take care of us. This is fundamentally wrong. It's not how I'm called religiously. It's not how the Bible calls folks religiously. The Bible calls us to care for one another, to love each other as we love the holy, to be able to bear witness to the holy in one another, and to know that the holy is way more than any of us can imagine, way more than any of us can put into a two-dimensional image or even shove something into a box. It's one of the reasons why I'm really disturbed when I go to Christian congregations and what's front and center is white Jesus, or even more aggressively sometimes Viking white Jesus. And, that might reflect the people who are in the congregation, but it certainly says to anybody who doesn't meet that image that this is the only image of God that's allowed. Doesn't say to anybody else, come on in, you also are reflected in our understanding of the holy and the sacred. I want to come back to this idea that when we meet one another, we are meeting someone who was also part of the sacred, who's been touched by the sacred, who has cosmic stardust as part of their makeup, who is special just because they are in their own uniqueness, and who isn't there to take care of us, to make us feel better, to make our lives significantly improved. That's treating other people as objects. And sometimes I meet people and I say, well, how would you like to be treated like that? I ask them to apply the golden rule, and sometimes, very facilely, they'll say, oh, I wouldn't mind. Or people treat me like that already. And there is a certain amount of that happens just to get through the transactions of a regular day, where we're not really able to slow enough to recognize the humanity of the person we're with. I invite us to imagine what the world would be like if we pushed back against that, and we did recognize the humanity. Challenging, different, maybe some of it's the same, some of this other person would be similar, we'd have points of connection, but not in service to one another. Being pressed into service to care for a certain group, be assumed to be available for that. It's tremendously dehumanizing. It's disheartening. And it allows for treating those folks as somehow less than being real people. We're not going to undo centuries of racism, classism, sexism, cisgenderism, ableism. We're not going to undo all of that overnight. The attitudinal shift, though, begins with saying, that's right. Other people don't exist to make my life better. Other people exist for their own selves, for their communities, for this world, because they exist, just as I do. And we exist in our differences. So let's find out what they are. You may have heard the term the platinum rule, knowing what it is that matters to another person so well you know how they want to be treated, you know their values, and you live from that, according them what's respect and dignity. Don't make assumptions. Assumptions are about keeping ourselves comfortable, not actually having to take a risk and be vulnerable. They can be useful in immediate responses, situations where lives really are on the line. But to live our life where most of the time they aren't on the line right that minute, to live our life as though we have to always be in that response of fear and anger, threat, or be threatened. That's not the way I want to live. It's not the world I want to live in, and it's not the world that I hear an awful lot of people want to live in. So what if? What if we stop long enough to really experience the people we're spending time with? long enough for an exchange, long enough to be uncomfortable. What if we take care of our feelings in ways that don't require people who are somehow less than, historically, have been graded as somehow less than, have to take care of? If you're white or you pass as white, that might be a real challenge to have to go learn to take care of your own stuff emotionally. And some people won't like me saying that. Yet the reality is, it happens all too often. Where there's tone policing going on. Oh, don't say it that way. It makes me uncomfortable. You sound so angry. Or there's an unwillingness to accept that bad stuff has happened. Well, it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes things are good. Let's look on the bright side. I love positivity, and I am a fan of thinking about what's good and focusing on what I'm grateful for, and really cultivating that sense of experience of wonder and resilience and generosity. And let's also be clear, it's been weaponized. It's been weaponized against people who are showing up with legitimate concerns and grievances, who have lots of reasons to express anger, pain, fear, and hurt. And they don't need somebody to say, because I know I've never needed it when I've been in those places myself. And somebody comes along and says, you know, you just sound so angry. It'd be better if you were just, quiet. Or I've tried it. Doesn't work for me. It just made other people around me slightly more comfortable for a little bit of time. And there is such a thing as righteous anger, holy lamentation, sharing what's going on. Let's not ask each other to squish into little boxes, to deny huge parts of ourselves. And let's also recognize that some people have been expected to do the heavy lifting emotionally for others for a long, long, long time. And that needs to stop, so that everybody can just do their own emotional lifting, work with their own therapists, find mental health professionals who can help you. There are a lot of people out there with sliding scales. And take responsibility. Learn how to live with discomfort. It isn't an overnight process, nor is it easy. But it is how we are called if we are truly to live into loving one another, meeting the holy in one another, and caring for each other as we love ourselves. Thanks for joining me today.